A child with his hands folded on his chest, eyes closed, legs drawn up, as if he had fallen asleep in a field. He was not sleeping. He was dying. Roughly 2,000 years ago, a volcano buried the Roman city of Pompeii under a wave of superheated gas and ash that reached temperatures of 250 degrees. Death came in seconds. The bodies were sealed in ash so fine that when the flesh decomposed, the void left behind preserved every contour. Fingers, eyelids, the folds of a tunic. Among the dead were children. For over a century, archaeologists told visitors that these children died beside their parents. A mother holding her baby, a father shielding his son, a family huddled together in their final moment. The stories were heartbreaking. They were also wrong. DNA extracted from bone fragments inside the plaster casts proved that most of the children were not with their parents when they died. They were with strangers. Some were with men who were not related to them at all. Some were alone. This is the story of the youngest victims of Pompeii. Who they were actually with when the volcano erupted, and what science now reveals about the hidden world of children in the Roman Empire. Pompeii sat on the coast of southern Italy on the Bay of Naples, roughly 8 kilometers from the summit of Vesuvius. It was a busy port city with a population of roughly 12,000 people. Markets, temples, workshops, taverns, bathhouses, and a large amphitheater filled its streets. The eruption began on a late summer morning. The first phase lasted roughly 18 hours. A column of pumice and ash shot 30 kilometers into the sky and rained down on the city, piling up on rooftops at a rate of roughly 15 centimeters per hour. Roofs began to collapse under the weight. Most people who could leave had already fled. Those who stayed behind, perhaps 2,000 individuals, were killed by what came next. In the early hours of the following morning, a series of pyroclastic surges rolled down the mountain. These were clouds of superheated gas and volcanic debris traveling at over 100 kilometers per hour. When they reached the city, the temperature inside buildings rose to at least 250 degrees in a single instant. There was no time to run, no time to scream. The heat killed faster than the lungs could register the burn. Among the last to die were 13 people found in a vineyard near the southern edge of the city, in an area now known as the Garden of the Fugitives. They had been trying to escape. They were heading toward a gate in the city wall, possibly already blocked by meters of fallen pumice. The pyroclastic surge caught them in the open. When archaeologists uncovered them in 1961, the group included adults and children. One small figure lay curled on his side, hands folded against his chest, legs drawn inward. He looked as though he were sleeping. The superintendent of the excavation wrote a story about him for an American magazine, describing him as a young boy from a merchant family, protected by his father until the very end. That story was fiction. It was written for the cameras and the readers. The superintendent had no evidence for any of it. No one checked. For 60 years, visitors walked past the casts and repeated the stories as if they were fact. A mother, a father, their children, a family that died together. But families in Pompeii did not look like modern families, and the children in these casts did not belong to the adults beside them. In 2024, a team from Harvard, the Max Planck Institute, and the University of Florence published a study in the journal Current Biology that changed everything we thought we knew about Pompeii's dead. They extracted DNA from bone fragments still embedded in the plaster casts. The technique was painstaking. During past restoration work, bones inside the casts had been broken, shifted, and mixed with plaster. Reaching them without destroying the casts required drilling through cracks barely wider than a pencil. Out of 14 casts sampled, 6 yielded usable DNA. 5 produced full genomic profiles, and the results overturned every story the museum had been telling. In the House of the Golden Bracelet, 4 bodies were found beneath a staircase. One adult held a small child on their lap, another adult sat nearby, and a second child lay beside them. For 50 years, they were displayed as a family, a mother, a father, 2 children. The golden bracelet on one adult's wrist was taken as proof that she was a wealthy woman. DNA analysis proved the adult wearing the bracelet was not female. He was male, carrying an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. The golden bracelet that had convinced everyone he was a mother was simply jewelry worn by a Roman man of high status. The small child on his lap was not related to him. None of the 4 individuals in the group shared close genetic ties. They were not a family, they were 4 people who happened to die in the same room. The child was roughly 4 years old. DNA did not reveal a surname or a status. It revealed an ancestry rooted in the Eastern Mediterranean, far from Italy. The child had been born into a family that had crossed the sea generations earlier, part of the vast movement of people that flowed through the Roman Empire. Who was holding this child when the pyroclastic surge arrived? Not a parent, but a servant, a neighbor, or a stranger who grabbed the nearest small body when the ceiling began to shake. We will never know. The story told to museum visitors for 5 decades of a mother cradling her baby in a final act of love was an invention. The same study examined other casts and found the same pattern. The adults and children found together were not related. The bonds between them were social, not biological. They were members of Roman households, which included not just blood relatives, but enslaved workers, freed servants, business partners, and hired laborers, all living under one roof. A Roman child did not grow up surrounded exclusively by parents and siblings. A Roman child grew up surrounded by the household. The people who fed them, dressed them, and carried them through the streets might be enslaved. The woman who nursed a baby might not be its mother, but a wet nurse purchased for the purpose. The man who held a child in his arms as the world ended might be a house slave, a tutor, a freedman, or a complete stranger who found the child alone in the chaos. DNA cannot tell us which, but it does tell us with certainty which of those people the children were not with, their parents. Now consider what that means for the children themselves. If these children were not with their families, where were their families? The most likely answer is that their parents had already left the city. During the first phase of the eruption, the 18 hours of pumice rain, most of Pompeii's wealthier residents fled. They had the means to leave. They had carts, horses, connections in nearby towns. They packed what they could and headed south or east, away from the mountain. The people who stayed behind were disproportionately the poor, the enslaved, the elderly, and the very young. People who could not leave on their own. People who had no one to carry them. A 4-year-old child cannot walk 8 kilometers through falling pumice to reach safety. If the parents left and could not carry the child stayed behind with whoever was in the house. A slave, a servant, a neighbor. The DNA evidence suggests this is exactly what happened. The adults found with the children were not their parents. They were the people who were left behind with them, the household members who did not have the option to flee, the ones at the bottom of the social hierarchy, holding someone else's child as the sky turned black. This is not a story about parental love frozen in ash. It is a story about who was left behind and who was expendable. In a different part of the city, a child's skeleton was found in the public bathhouse in 2018. The child was 7 or 8 years old, found alone, crouching in a corner of the bath complex, legs drawn up, arms folded. The pyroclastic surge had entered through the windows and sealed the space. There was no adult with this child, no parent, no slave, no one. This child had tried to shelter alone in a public building while the city died around them. We do not know their name. We do not know their sex. DNA analysis was proposed at the time of discovery and may yet be conducted. We know only that a child of 7 or 8 was alone in a bathhouse during the worst volcanic disaster in Roman history. The Romans did not think about children the way modern societies do. Roman law classified children under the authority of the father, the pater familias, who had legal power of life and death over every member of his household, including his own children. A father could sell a child into slavery. A father could expose a newborn, leaving it outside to die if it was unwanted, deformed, or female. Not every father did these things, but the law permitted them. A child in Roman Pompeii was not a protected individual. A child was property of the household head, valued for future utility, not for inherent rights. For over a century, historians believed Roman children grew up in close nuclear families, protected and loved in the modern sense. DNA says otherwise. The household was the unit that raised children, and the household was a complex, often brutal institution that mixed blood relatives with enslaved strangers under a single roof. A child's daily caretaker was more likely to be an enslaved nurse than a mother. In wealthy families, children were handed to wet nurses within days of birth. The wet nurse, often an enslaved woman, would feed, carry and comfort the child through its earliest years. When the child outgrew the nurse, it was handed to a pedagogus, an enslaved tutor, usually a Greek-speaking man, who accompanied the child everywhere, including to school. The biological mother, in many elite Roman households, was a distant figure. She managed the household. She oversaw the slaves. She attended social functions. The physical labor of raising children was delegated downward to the enslaved. The children of enslaved women were automatically enslaved themselves, born into bondage. The child in the House of the Golden Bracelet with Eastern Mediterranean ancestry may well have been a slave child. The golden bracelet on the arm of the man who held him was not worn for the child's benefit. It was worn for the man's status. The child was simply there, present in the room, present in the disaster, unnamed in the archaeological record. Roman tombstone inscriptions from Pompeii and the surrounding region give us a glimpse into how common child death was. Roughly 1 in 3 Roman children died before the age of 5. Disease, malnutrition, infection, and the dangers of a world without antibiotics or clean water made childhood a gauntlet of survival. Parents did not always name a child until it had survived its first week. Gravestones for very young children are brief, sometimes just a single line. The name, the age, nothing more. Children who survived past 5 entered the workforce early. Boys as young as 6 or 7 were apprenticed to craftsmen, bakers and potters. Girls were put to work spinning wool, grinding grain, or helping in kitchens. The children of slaves worked alongside their parents from the moment they could carry a bucket. In the bakeries of Pompeii, where millstones were turned by enslaved workers and by donkeys in windowless rooms, the bones of children have been found among the debris, not as victims of the eruption, but as part of the permanent workforce. Small hands, thin bones, the marks of repetitive labor visible on their skeletons long before adolescence. The Garden of the Fugitives holds the smallest cast ever made at Pompeii, a baby possibly less than a year old. Curled inward, tiny hands visible, carried in someone's arms when the surge hit. The baby and the person carrying it died in the same instant. Visitors stand before this cast and weep. They see a mother's final act of protection. But we do not know who was carrying that baby. We do not know if the carrier was male or female, free or enslaved, a parent or a stranger. We know only that someone was running toward the city gate with a baby in their arms, and neither of them made it. The DNA revolution at Pompeii has only just begun. Of the 104 original plaster casts made by the 19th century archaeologists, only 14 have been sampled. Of those, only 6 yielded DNA. Of the roughly 2,000 people estimated to have died in the city, fewer than a dozen have been genetically tested. The children of Pompeii remain, for the most part, unknown. Their bones are inside plaster shells in museum storage rooms and under glass in the archaeological park. Their stories, as told to tourists, are fictions written by men who assumed that children found near adults must be with their parents. Science has corrected a handful of those fictions, but the vast majority have not yet been tested. When they are, the results will almost certainly reveal the same pattern. Household bonds, not blood. Social proximity, not family. For over 150 years, the plaster casts of Pompeii's children have been exhibited as evidence of parental love. DNA says otherwise. They are evidence of something more complex and more disturbing. A society where children belonged not to their parents, but to their household. Where the person holding a dying child might be a slave with no legal right to refuse. Where a baby could be carried towards safety by someone who had never been given the choice to run. The children of Pompeii did not die in the arms of their mothers. They died in the arms of whoever was left in the house when the mountain exploded. Slaves, servants, neighbors, strangers. The ash preserved everything. The positions of their bodies, the folds of their clothing, the expression on a face frozen mid-breath. But it did not preserve the truth about who these people were to each other. That truth was hidden for over a century, buried under assumptions that felt natural but were never tested. DNA tested them, and the stories fell apart. Somewhere inside the remaining casts, inside the unexcavated third of the city, inside museum drawers that have not been opened in decades, there are more children waiting to be identified, more stories waiting to be corrected, more truths that the ash preserved and that human assumption concealed. For over 150 years, visitors looked at these casts and saw families. DNA says otherwise. Discovery continues. Thanks for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover DNA mysteries, ancient forensics, and the cases history tried to forget.